Did you know that some of Hollywood's biggest female stars in the Golden Age fought tooth and nail for something that should have been a given? Equal pay. The Hollywood Golden Age, spanning from the 1930s to the 1950s, was a time when the silver screen sparkled with the brilliance of iconic stars. Women like Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, and Katharine Hepburn weren't just the faces of some of the greatest films ever made, they were forces to be reckoned with. Their talent was undeniable, and yet they were paid far less than their male counterparts. How could this happen in an industry that was built on their popularity and influence? But what really happened behind the glitz and glamour? How did these powerful women take on the industry, and what were the consequences of their fight? Let's dive into their stories and discover how they changed Hollywood forever. The Hollywood Golden Age. Hollywood's Golden Age was a time of massive cinematic innovation and cultural influence. From the 1930s to the 1950s, the movie industry was at its peak. Think of the grand, larger-than-life studios, the dazzling red carpets, and the stars whose names lit up theaters across the world. It was a time when actresses like Joan Crawford, Bette Davis, and Katharine Hepburn weren't just stars, they were legends. These women shaped the films that would go on to define cinema history. These actresses weren't just known for their incredible talent, they were box office draws. Joan Crawford, for example, became a household name with her powerful performances in films like Mildred Pierce. Bette Davis earned the title of the First Lady of the American screen through a series of unforgettable roles, including Now Voyager and All About Eve. Katharine Hepburn, known for her fierce independence and wit, became the symbol of a modern, empowered woman in movies like The Philadelphia Story and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But here's the question that keeps nagging at us. If these women were so powerful on screen, if they were the driving forces behind some of Hollywood's biggest films, why were they being paid less than their male counterparts? Why were their names in lights, but their paychecks not reflecting their worth? It's a mystery that would take years, and a lot of fights, to unravel. The pay gap. Despite the immense popularity and talent of female stars during Hollywood's Golden Age, there was a shocking reality behind the scenes: pay inequality. While male actors like Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, and Cary Grant raked in huge salaries, women, even those with equal or greater box office power, were paid far less. It didn't matter if a star's name was above the title on a movie poster. The paychecks didn't match their contributions. The pay gap wasn't just a minor issue. It was a glaring problem that these women couldn't ignore. Let's put the numbers into perspective. Bette Davis, widely considered one of the most talented actresses of the era, was one of the most glaring examples of this inequality. In the 1930s, she was earning about $1,000 a week on her contract, a figure that was shockingly low compared to her male counterparts. For comparison, a male actor like Warner Baxter, who was in the same league as Bette Davis in terms of fame and popularity, was earning $7,500 per week. That's 7 times what she was making. This disparity was not an isolated case. Joan Crawford, another top-tier actress, was paid a mere fraction of what her male co-stars were earning. Her salary was often far below the $5,000 per week that actors like Clark Gable or Gary Cooper were taking home. And let's not forget Katharine Hepburn, who was known for her independent spirit and refusal to play by the rules. Even though she was an established star with a string of successful films, her salary was still much lower than that of her male peers. The difference wasn't just a few dollars here and there. It was the difference between a comfortable life and one where these actresses had to fight for every penny. This pay gap didn't just sting financially, it had a profound impact on these women's careers. Unlike their male counterparts who could demand more significant roles, higher salaries, and better opportunities as they rose in fame, female stars often found themselves pigeonholed into specific roles, typically those of the romantic lead or the distressed woman in need of saving. This limitation affected their long-term career growth. As male stars like Humphrey Bogart or Cary Grant enjoyed a wide range of roles and were paid accordingly, female actresses were still often stuck in the same tired narrative arcs. For example, Bette Davis, despite being one of the highest-grossing stars of the time, was constantly in battle with Warner Brothers, the studio that held her contract. The studio, which controlled her career, limited her options and regularly cast her in films that didn't showcase her full range. The financial disparity, coupled with these restrictions, took a toll on her. Joan Crawford, too, found herself restricted by the studio system, and though she was one of the most popular actresses of the era, her income didn't reflect her influence in Hollywood. But the pay gap wasn't just about money, it also reflected the broader societal attitudes of the time. Women were often seen as secondary figures in Hollywood, even though they were the ones driving the success of many films. The disparity between male and female pay didn't just speak to financial inequality, it highlighted the industry's deep-seated sexism. Actresses had to work harder, fight harder, and prove themselves over and over again to even be considered worthy of a fraction of what their male peers earned. This created an environment where women were constantly overlooked and undervalued, even though they were, in many cases, the lifeblood of the studio system. Their box office draw made studios millions, yet they saw little of that financial success in their paychecks. And this wasn't just a small-scale issue, it was institutional, embedded in the very fabric of Hollywood. So why did these women, who were so talented and beloved, put up with this for so long? Was it because they didn't have the power to fight back? Or did they just accept that this was how Hollywood worked back then? The truth is far more complicated than it seems. And when we return, we'll explore how the fight for equal pay began to take shape, even against such overwhelming odds. The rise of the fight for equal pay. The fight for equal pay didn't happen overnight. It started with small moments, but it was the determination of a few fearless actresses that eventually sparked change. One of the earliest and most notable voices in this fight was Bette Davis. Known for her powerful performances, Davis was not just a force on screen, she was about to become one off-screen too. After years of struggling with her salary and feeling undervalued by the studio system, she had had enough. Davis began to speak out against the treatment of women in Hollywood. In the early 1940s, she took on the studio system directly, challenging the traditional contracts that held actresses in place. She fought for better terms, and in 1942 she successfully renegotiated her contract with Warner Brothers, securing a more favorable deal that allowed her to take on roles she wanted. But Davis wasn't alone in this fight. Joan Crawford, another major star of the time, also began to push back against the pay disparity. At the heart of the issue was the studio contract system. This system tied actors and actresses to one studio, often for years, with little room for negotiation. It was a system that kept actors in line, underpaid, and often overworked. But for women, the system was even more restrictive. While male stars like Clark Gable and Gary Cooper could leverage their fame to secure higher pay and more freedom, actresses had fewer options. They were bound by their contracts, often stuck in repetitive roles and powerless to change their pay. But the women who were fed up, like Davis and Crawford, were determined to challenge this. They realized that to gain more control over their careers and ultimately their pay, they needed to take a stand. Joan Crawford, in particular, was incredibly outspoken. She famously used her influence to negotiate higher pay for herself. In 1945, after a string of box office hits, Crawford demanded more money from her studio, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, MGM. She argued that her success justified her demand for a higher salary, and in a groundbreaking move, she won. Crawford's successful negotiation marked a shift in how female stars began to approach the issue of pay. No longer were they willing to accept the status quo. Bette Davis, too, used her influence in bold ways. After years of frustration with her low pay, Davis became more vocal, calling out the studios for their unequal treatment of women. Her boldness ultimately led to other actresses taking notice, creating a ripple effect throughout Hollywood. It wasn't just about money, it was about respect and control. But as these women fought to be heard, a turning point was on the horizon, a move that would change everything for female stars in Hollywood. They were about to gain something much more powerful than just higher pay, control over their careers. What was this game-changing move? Let's find out next. The turning point. By the mid-1940s, the dissatisfaction with the studio system had reached its peak. Female stars, once at the mercy of studio executives and their restrictive contracts, realized that the only way to truly change the pay gap was to take matters into their own hands. They needed more power, more freedom, and they found a way to get it. The key? Independent production companies. Joan Crawford, one of the most influential figures in this movement, was one of the first to take a bold step in a new direction. In 1945, after achieving major success at the box office, she established her own independent production company, Joan Crawford Productions. This move was groundbreaking. By creating her own company, Crawford gained the ability to negotiate her pay directly. bypassing the traditional studio system that had limited her control over her career. Crawford wasn't just looking to make more money for herself. She was looking to change the very system that had treated women unfairly for so long. Through her independent production company, she secured roles that not only paid her better, but also gave her more creative freedom. By taking control of her career, she sent a message to the rest of Hollywood. Women didn't need to rely on studios anymore. They could create their paths. Crawford's move was bold, but it wasn't just a personal victory. It set the stage for other actresses to follow suit. Stars like Bette Davis and Barbara Stanwyck began exploring similar paths, signing deals that gave them more power over their salaries and career choices. These women were no longer willing to play by the old rules. The impact of these independent companies was profound. They were a direct challenge to the studio system's control over actors, and they empowered female stars to take their careers into their own hands. With these companies, actresses could negotiate higher salaries, demand better roles, and most importantly, have a say in the direction of their careers. What began as a fight for fair pay soon became a fight for autonomy, and the studios couldn't ignore it. As more actresses joined the movement, the tide began to turn. Hollywood started to realize that women could no longer be treated as second-class citizens in the industry. It was clear that these actresses were not only stars, they were business people too, and they had the power to demand more. But this wasn't the end of the story. The question remained, did these efforts change the system for good? Were these women's battles for equal pay and control truly won? The answer might surprise you. Stick around as we explore the long-lasting effects of their fight and how it paved the way for future generations of women in Hollywood. Long-term effects and legacy. The battles fought by women like Bette Davis, Joan Crawford, and others didn't just change their careers, they changed Hollywood forever. Their efforts to secure equal pay and control over their careers laid the groundwork for future generations of actresses to demand better treatment, higher pay, and more opportunities. By the late 1940s and 1950s, the tide had started to shift. Female stars were no longer as easily pushed aside or silenced by the powerful studios. Their independence and willingness to fight for what they deserved opened doors for future women in Hollywood. However, it's important to note that while these women made great strides, the system wasn't fully transformed overnight. The industry remained male-dominated, and women still faced many challenges. But the seeds of change had been planted. What began as a fight for equal pay slowly evolved into a broader movement for gender equality in the industry, setting the stage for the feminist wave of the 1960s and 1970s. Fast forward to today, and the legacy of those pioneering actresses can still be felt. Actresses like Reese Witherspoon, Natalie Portman, and Jennifer Lawrence have all spoken out about the pay disparities they've faced in Hollywood. The gender pay gap in Hollywood, though smaller than it was in the Golden Age, still exists. But the groundwork laid by women like Bette Davis and Joan Crawford has made it possible for modern actresses to fight for their worth. Women now have more power than ever before to negotiate for equal pay, and they continue to advocate for more representation, opportunities, and fair treatment. Today's stars can look back at those Golden Age actresses and see how their courage and persistence changed the game. It's no coincidence that women are leading major films and behind-the-scenes projects today. That change began with the women who refused to accept the status quo, who fought for equal pay, and who took control of their careers. The legacy of these women is clear. Their fight wasn't just about money, it was about respect, autonomy, and paving the way for the next generation of women in Hollywood. They proved that women could be powerful not just on screen but behind the scenes as well. Their actions set the stage for future actresses and filmmakers to have more control over their narratives, both financially and creatively. But here's the question that remains. How far have we truly come? While much progress has been made, there are still battles to fight. How much further can the industry go to achieve true gender equality? The fight is far from over, and as history has shown, the women of Hollywood won't stop until they've secured what they deserve.